My name is Lula Martinez, and I'm 62 years old. I've been a retired nurse living in my small but cozy home here in Phoenix, Arizona for the past 5 years. Just last week, I did something that filled my heart with more joy than I'd felt in years. I gave my son Marcus $50,000 to help him open the small coffee shop he'd been dreaming about. Watching him light up when he talked about his plans made every sacrifice I'd made as a single mother worth it. I imagined myself sitting in his cafe proudly telling everyone that my successful son owned this beautiful place. But 2 days later, Marcus called me with news that shattered my world. He wanted to invite me to his grand opening, but there was a catch. The ticket to attend would cost me $1,500. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I responded when my own son demanded I pay to celebrate his success that I had just funded. Let me tell you about Marcus and how we got to this point. He's my only child, born when I was 24 and full of dreams about raising a family with his father. Those dreams crumbled when my husband walked out on us when Marcus was just 10 years old. I remember that cold February morning when I found the note on the kitchen table saying he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. Marcus was eating his cereal, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. From that day forward, it was just me and my boy against the world. I picked up extra shifts at Phoenix General Hospital working nights so I could be home during the day when Marcus got back from school. Those were exhausting years. I'd come home at 7 in the morning, help Marcus get ready for school, catch a few hours of sleep, then wake up to help him with homework before heading back to the hospital for another 12-hour shift. Even as a child, Marcus had expensive tastes. While other kids were happy with toys from the dollar store, Marcus always wanted the name brand everything. The latest sneakers, the newest video games, the most popular clothes. I told myself this was normal. He was just a boy who wanted to fit in. So I worked harder, saved every penny, and somehow always found a way to give him what he wanted. When Marcus graduated high school as valedictorian, I was bursting with pride. The scholarship offers came pouring in, but Marcus had his heart set on Harvard Business School. The partial scholarship would cover about half the tuition, but the rest was up to us. I sold my car and took the bus to work for 3 years. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could send him money for meals and books. I didn't buy myself a single piece of new clothing for 5 years straight. During his college years, Marcus would call home maybe once a month, usually when he needed money for something. Spring break trips, networking dinners, study abroad programs. Each request came with a detailed explanation of how this opportunity would benefit his future career, and I believed every word. How could I deny my brilliant son the chances I never had? After graduation, Marcus landed a position at a prestigious consulting firm in New York City. I was so proud when he called to tell me about his starting salary, which was more than I'd ever made in a year as a nurse. I thought finally, after all those years of struggle, we'd both made it. Marcus was successful, and I could start living a little for myself. But something changed in Marcus during those early career years. Our phone calls became less frequent and shorter. When I suggested visiting him in New York, he always had an excuse. Too busy with work, traveling for clients, his apartment was too small for guests. The last time I actually saw my son in person was 3 years ago when he came home for exactly one night during Christmas. He spent most of that visit on his phone dealing with work emails and left early the next morning saying he had an important meeting. I started to feel like I was losing my son to his ambitious new life, but I told myself this was what success looked like. Important people were busy people, and Marcus was clearly very important now. Last Tuesday evening, I was watering my small garden when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and for the first time in months, he sounded different. His voice was softer, more vulnerable than the confident businessman tone he'd developed over the years. He was actually crying as he spoke. "Mom," he said between sniffles, "I need to tell you about something that means everything to me. I found the perfect location for my coffee shop in Manhattan. It's everything I've dreamed of, but I need capital to make it happen." My heart melted. This was the Marcus I remembered, the young man who used to share his dreams with me. He spent the next hour describing his vision for this boutique coffee experience. He talked about creating a space where busy New Yorkers could slow down and connect with each other over perfectly crafted lattes and artisanal pastries. His passion was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about his plans. The location is incredible, Mom. It's in Soho, right in the heart of where all the artists and creative professionals gather. The rent is steep, but the foot traffic is guaranteed. I've already talked to suppliers about getting the best beans from small farms in Colombia and Guatemala. This isn't just going to be another coffee shop. It's going to be an experience, a destination. As I listened to Marcus describe his dream, I thought about the money sitting in my savings account. It was everything I had managed to accumulate over my entire working life. The life insurance payout from when my ex-husband died 5 years ago, plus my pension savings, plus the small emergency fund I'd built up over decades of careful budgeting. $50,000 wasn't a fortune, but it represented security for my golden years. But hearing the excitement in Marcus's voice reminded me why I'd worked so hard all those years. It wasn't for my own comfort. It was to give my son opportunities to build the life he wanted. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank, where I'd been a customer for over 20 years. Sarah, the branch manager who had helped me through my divorce and my husband's death, greeted me with her usual warm smile. "What can I help you with today, Lula?" she asked as we sat down in her office. "I need to write a check for $50,000, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's a significant amount. May I ask what this is for?" I explained about Marcus's coffee shop dream, about how proud I was that he wanted to be an entrepreneur. Sarah listened politely, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Lula, you've been very careful with your money over the years. This represents almost all of your liquid savings. Are you sure about this?" Maybe you could loan him a smaller amount to start, but I was determined. This felt like the most important thing I could do as a mother. "Sarah, I've spent my whole life saving for the future. Well, my son's future is happening now, and I want to be part of it." She printed out the cashier's check, and I signed it, with hands that trembled slightly from excitement, not fear. As I walked out of the bank that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Marcus graduated college, I felt like I was truly helping my son in a meaningful way. That evening, I called Marcus and told him the check was in the mail. The joy in his voice was worth every penny. "Mom, you have no idea what this means to me. I'm going to make you so proud. This coffee shop is going to be incredible, and you're going to have the best seat in the house for the grand opening." I went to bed that night dreaming about sitting in Marcus's beautiful cafe, watching him work with pride, maybe even helping out behind the counter on busy days. Thursday morning started like any other. I was having my usual breakfast of oatmeal and fresh berries when my phone rang at exactly 9:30. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with a smile, expecting to hear about his progress with the cafe preparations. "Hello, sweetheart. How are the plans coming along?" But the voice that responded wasn't the warm, grateful son I'd spoken to just 2 days earlier. This Marcus sounded cold, businesslike, almost like he was reading from a script. "Mom, I'm calling about the grand opening. It's going to be a VIP event, and if you want to attend, you'll need to purchase a ticket." I laughed, thinking he was making some kind of joke. "What do you mean, purchase a ticket? Don't be silly, Marcus." "I'm completely serious," he replied, his tone remaining flat and professional. "The ticket price is $1,500. This is a business networking event, not a family gathering." The smile fell from my face. I set down my spoon and gripped the phone tighter. "Marcus, are you being serious right now? I just gave you $50,000 2 days ago." "That was an investment in my business," he said matter-of-factly. "This is a separate event with associated costs. The ticket covers catering entertainment and provides access to some very important potential investors and influencers. $1,500 is actually quite reasonable for this level of networking opportunity." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window, staring out at my small backyard, where I'd imagined telling my neighbors about Marcus's success. "But Marcus, I'm your mother. I just gave you all of my savings to make this dream possible. Surely you're not actually expecting me to pay to attend your opening." "Mom, you need to understand that this is how business works in Manhattan. This isn't some casual coffee shop in Phoenix. We're talking about building relationships with people who could make or break my future in this industry. The guest list includes food bloggers, restaurant investors, and social media influencers who have millions of followers. I sank back down into my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. This couldn't be my son talking. Marcus, are you telling me that if I can't afford this ticket, I can't come to your grand opening? There was a pause that seemed to last forever before he responded. Look, Mom, I know this might seem harsh, but I have to think about the image I'm projecting. This event is about establishing my brand and making the right connections. If you can't afford the ticket, then maybe it's better if you just watch the live stream I'll be posting on social media. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around my small kitchen at the refrigerator covered with photos of Marcus from kindergarten through college graduation, at the modest furnishings I'd carefully chosen during better times. Everything in this house represented years of sacrifice for the young man who was now treating me like a stranger. I tried one more time to reason with my son, hoping to find some trace of the boy I'd raised. Marcus, sweetheart, you know I don't have that kind of money lying around. The $50,000 was literally everything I had saved. I'm living on my pension now. But instead of understanding or compassion, Marcus's response revealed a side of him that left me speechless. Mom, you've always been poor. You just don't understand how these high-level business events work. This isn't some church potluck in Phoenix. The word poor hung in the air between us like a slap. Poor, after working double shifts for years to pay for his education. Poor, after selling everything I owned to give him opportunities. Poor, after sacrificing my own retirement security just days earlier to fund his dreams. Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to how his words were destroying me. The guest list for this event reads like a who's who of Manhattan's food and business scene. We'll have Jennifer Walsh, the food critic from New York Magazine, David Chen, the investor who backed 3 restaurants that are now worth millions, and Sofia Rodriguez. She has over 2 million Instagram followers and can make or break a restaurant with a single post. He was speaking about these people like I should know who they were, like their approval was more important than his own mother's presence at the most important day of his professional life. Mom, imagine if you showed up in one of your outfits from Walmart. How do you think that would look to these people? They're used to designer everything. This is about maintaining a certain image, and honestly, you don't fit that image. Each word felt like a knife. I thought about the blue dress I'd been planning to wear to his opening, the one I'd bought on sale at JCPenney 3 years ago, but had been saving for a special occasion. I thought about how excited I'd been to finally have something wonderful to celebrate, how I'd been planning to get my hair done for the first time in months. Marcus, I said quietly, do you remember when you were 12 and wanted those expensive basketball shoes for tryouts? I worked overtime for 6 weeks straight to buy them for you. I was so tired I could barely stand, but I wanted you to have what you needed to succeed. That's different, Mom. That was when I was a kid. This is my adult life, my professional reputation. You have to understand that in New York, perception is everything. The people at this event will judge me based on everything, including my family. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, I asked the question that had been building in my chest. Marcus, what exactly do you think I am to you? Another long pause. When he finally answered, his words changed everything between us forever. Honestly, you've been my funding source. And now that funding phase is complete. This next phase is about building my professional network, and you just don't have anything to offer in that area. I felt something break inside my chest, not just my heart, but something deeper. The illusion I'd been living under for years, the belief that all my sacrifices had been building towards something beautiful between us. If you can't afford the ticket, don't come, Marcus said with the same tone he might use to dismiss a telemarketer. I'll tell people you were too busy to attend. No one needs to know about your financial situation. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the photos on my refrigerator. Marcus, at his 8th grade science fair holding up his first-place ribbon. Marcus at high school graduation smiling in his cap and gown. Marcus at Harvard, looking confident and successful. When had the sweet boy in these pictures turned into someone who could speak to his mother with such calculated coldness? That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even cry. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching someone else's life fall apart. Around midnight, I found myself standing in Marcus's old bedroom, which I'd kept exactly the same since he left for college. His walls were still covered with achievement certificates and academic awards. His bookshelf held all the expensive textbooks I'd struggled to buy for him. His desk still had the computer I'd worked extra shifts to purchase when he was in high school. Every object in this room represented a sacrifice I'd made gladly, believing I was investing in my son's character as much as his future success. But, standing there in the darkness, I began to see these items differently. They weren't evidence of Marcus's hard work and intelligence. They were evidence of how I'd created a young man who expected everything to be handed to him, who measured relationships in terms of what people could provide for him. I remembered the times Marcus had called me from college not to ask how I was doing or to share something exciting that had happened, but always because he needed something. Money for books, money for a class trip, money for a laptop, money for interview clothes. And I'd always said yes, always found a way, always made it work somehow. I'd told myself I was being a good mother, giving my son every opportunity. But sitting in his childhood room at 2 a.m, I realized I'd actually been teaching him that love meant giving him whatever he wanted without question. I'd never required him to work for anything, never taught him to value what he received, never showed him that relationships were about mutual care and respect. At 3 a.m., I called my sister Elena in California. She'd always been the practical one in our family, and she'd never particularly liked Marcus's entitled attitude, though she'd been diplomatic about it over the years. "Lula, what's wrong?" "It's 3 a.m. Through tears, I told her everything. About the $50,000, about the ticket demand, about Marcus calling me his funding source. Elena listened in silence until I finished. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I've been waiting for this phone call for years." "What do you mean?" "Lula, I love you, but you've been enabling that boy since he was small. Do you remember his 16th birthday when he threw a tantrum because you got him a used car instead of a new one? I tried to talk to you about it then." I did remember. Marcus had been furious that his car wasn't as nice as his classmates. He'd refused to drive it for a week until I agreed to take out a loan for a better one. "I remember how you worked yourself to the bone to pay for that business school," Elena continued, "and how he never once asked how you were managing financially or offered to get a part-time job to help. Even then, I could see where this was heading." Elena was right, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it. "I thought I was being a good mother," I whispered. "You were being a loving mother," Elena corrected gently. "But love without boundaries isn't actually love. It's fear. You were so afraid of disappointing him or losing his affection that you never taught him how to be grateful or how to consider other people's needs." We talked until sunrise, and by the time I hung up, something had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I was thinking clearly about my relationship with Marcus. I decided to try one more time. I called Marcus back that morning and left a long voicemail when he didn't answer. I told him how much I loved him, how proud I was of his accomplishments, but also how deeply hurt I was by his treatment of me. I explained that the $50,000 represented my entire safety net, and that demanding an additional $1,500 felt like he was treating me like a stranger, rather than the mother who had sacrificed everything for his success. His response came via text message 2 hours later. "Drama isn't necessary. Your decision whether to attend or not." That was it. No acknowledgement of my feelings, no recognition of my sacrifice, no indication that he cared about our relationship beyond what I could provide financially. Friday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Marcus had hung up on me, I wasn't sad or confused. I was determined. I got dressed, had my coffee, and drove straight to First National Bank. Sarah was surprised to see me back so soon. "Lula, what can I help you with today?" "I need to stop payment on that check I wrote Tuesday," I said firmly. Sarah's eyes widened. "Oh my, did something happen?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could. Sarah listened with growing amazement, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said when I finished. "But I have good news. Since it's Friday and the check was written Tuesday, it hasn't cleared yet due to the weekend delay. We can absolutely stop payment. There will be a $30 fee." "$30 well spent," I replied, and I meant it. As Sarah processed the stop payment order, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. For years, I'd been living in anxiety about Marcus, about whether I was doing enough for him, about whether he was happy with me. Now, for the first time since he'd left for college, I was making a decision based on what was right rather than what Marcus wanted. Lula, Sarah said as she handed me the paperwork, I'm proud of you for doing this. It takes courage to set boundaries, especially with our children. Driving home from the bank, I started thinking about what to do with the money I'd just reclaimed. For a few minutes, I considered keeping it in savings, going back to my careful, constrained lifestyle. But then I realized something important. I'd been so focused on securing Marcus's future that I'd never thought about my own. That afternoon, I called the Phoenix Community Foundation, where I'd volunteered during my working years. I spoke with Maria, the director of their scholarship program for underprivileged kids. Maria, I'd like to make a donation to establish a nursing scholarship, I said. $20,000 for students who want to enter healthcare but need financial assistance. Maria was thrilled. We spent an hour discussing how the scholarship would work, and I felt a joy I hadn't experienced in years. This money would help young people who understood the value of hard work and service, who would use their education to help others rather than just to accumulate wealth and status. With the remaining $30,000, I did something I'd never done in my entire adult life. I opened a travel savings account. I'd always dreamed of seeing Europe, of visiting the places I'd only read about in books. Marcus's betrayal had shown me that I couldn't count on him to be part of my future, so I needed to start building a future for myself. That evening, I sat down and wrote Marcus an email. I didn't write it in anger or hurt, but from a place of clarity and self-respect. Marcus, I've stopped payment on the check I sent you. This money will instead go toward helping young nursing students who understand the value of education and service to others. I've also decided to use some of it to finally take the European trip I've dreamed of for 20 years. I want you to know that I love you deeply, and I always will. You're my son, and nothing can change that. But I've realized that giving you everything you wanted hasn't helped you become the man I hoped you'd be. Instead, it's taught you that people exist to serve your needs and that love can be bought with money. I hope your coffee shop succeeds, and I hope you find happiness. But I also hope that someday you'll understand that the most valuable things in life, like love and respect and genuine relationships, can't be purchased with a ticket price. I'll always be here if you want a real relationship with me, one based on mutual care and respect rather than financial transactions. Until then, I'm going to focus on living my own life with the same energy I once devoted to funding yours. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 3 months later, I was in my garden when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and my heart still jumped when I saw his name despite everything that had happened. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded different again. Smaller, less confident than the businessman who had demanded ticket money from me. "Hello, Marcus. I need to tell you something. The coffee shop failed. I had to close it last week." I felt a mixture of sadness for his disappointment and vindication for my decision. "What happened?" "I spent too much money on the wrong things, the fancy equipment, the expensive location trying to impress investors, instead of focusing on actually running a business. I thought having the right image was more important than having a sustainable business model." He was quiet for a long moment before continuing. "I also want to apologize for how I treated you. The things I said were unforgivable. You've been the best mother anyone could ask for, and I turned you into an ATM instead of treating you like a person who deserved love and respect." I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mix of relief and continued hurt. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus. I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm in serious financial trouble. The lease obligations, the equipment loans. I could really use some help getting back on my feet." And there it was. Even in his apology, even in his acknowledgement of his mistakes, Marcus was still asking me to solve his problems with money. "Marcus," I said gently but firmly, "I love you. You're my son, and I always want to know that you're safe and healthy. But I'm not going to give you money. Mom, please. I've learned my lesson. I know I was wrong." "If you've truly learned, then you'll find a way to solve this problem yourself. Getting rescued by me again won't teach you anything except that your mistakes don't have real consequences." I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. What am I supposed to do? What millions of people do every day? Find a job, work hard, live within your means, and rebuild your life step by step. It won't be easy, but it will be yours. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time thinking about the conversation. It had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done saying no to my son when he was struggling, but I finally understood that continuing to rescue him would have been cruelty disguised as kindness. 2 weeks later, I left for my trip to Tuscany. I spent a month in a small village outside Florence, staying in a charming bed and breakfast run by an elderly Italian couple named Giuseppe and Anna. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee, and I'd spend my days exploring medieval towns, learning to cook traditional recipes and having conversations with fellow travelers from around the world. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself. I wasn't checking my phone constantly to see if Marcus needed something. I wasn't calculating how much I could afford to spend based on what I might need to send him. I was just Lula, a woman discovering what brought her joy. I made friends with a group of other solo travelers, women in their 60s and 70s, who had also reached a point where they decided to prioritize their own dreams. We shared stories over wine and pasta, and I realized how much of my identity I'd wrapped up in being Marcus's mother, rather than being my own person. 6 months after I returned from Italy, Marcus called again. This time, he wasn't asking for money. He'd found a job as a manager at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, and he was slowly paying off his debts. More importantly, he sounded different, humbler but also more genuinely confident than the brash businessman who had demanded ticket money from me. "I've been going to therapy," he told me during one of our weekly calls, "trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did." "What have you learned?" I asked. "That I never learned how to fail. You protected me from every consequence, fixed every problem, and gave me everything I wanted. So I grew up thinking that's how the world worked, that people existed to make my life easier. When I got to the real world and discovered that wasn't true, instead of adjusting my expectations, I just looked for people I could manipulate into playing that role." It was the most self-aware conversation we'd ever had. "I also realized," he continued, "that I never actually thanked you for everything you sacrificed for me, not just the money, but the years of working double shifts, the times you went without so I could have what I wanted. I took all of that for granted, like it was just what mothers were supposed to do." "It was what I wanted to do," I said. "But you're right that gratitude would have made those sacrifices feel very different." Over the following months, Marcus and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't the same as before, and it never would be. But it was better in many ways because it was based on honesty rather than obligation. He started visiting me in Phoenix every few months, paying for his own flights and hotel. We'd cook together, work in the garden, and have real conversations about our lives. He told me about his struggles at work, his hopes for the future, his relationships. I told him about my travels, my volunteer work, my own dreams and fears. The Marcus who visited me now was someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, not just someone I loved out of maternal obligation. He was kinder, more thoughtful, more curious about other people's experiences. The failure of his coffee shop and the necessity of rebuilding his life from scratch had taught him lessons that all my financial support never could. One evening, as we were sitting on my back patio watching the sunset, Marcus brought up the coffee shop incident. "I still can't believe I charged my own mother a ticket fee," he said, shaking his head. "What was I thinking?" "You were thinking like someone who had never learned the difference between a business relationship and a family relationship," I replied. "But you've learned it now. The worst part is," he continued, "even if you had paid that $1,500, the event was a disaster. Half the important people I'd invited didn't show up, and the ones who did just ate the expensive food and left. I spent more money trying to impress people who didn't care about me than I would have made in months of actual coffee sales." "Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones," I said. As I think back on that terrible phone call when Marcus demanded I buy a ticket to his grand opening, I realize it was one of the best things that ever happened to both of us. It forced me to see our relationship clearly for the first time in years, and it forced him to confront the kind of person he'd become. I learned that true love sometimes means disappointing people in the short term to help them become better in the long term. I learned that my worth as a mother wasn't measured by how much I could give my son, but by whether I could raise him to be someone capable of giving to others. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your own life. For 20 years, I'd defined myself entirely in relation to Marcus and his needs. The moment I stopped payment on that check was the moment I remembered that Lula Martinez was a person with her own dreams, her own value, her own right to respect and consideration. Marcus learned that charm and ambition weren't enough to build a meaningful life. He learned that real success comes from hard work, gratitude, and genuine care for other people. He learned that the people who love you aren't there to fund your dreams, but to support you as you work to achieve them yourself. Our relationship now is built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. When Marcus calls me, it's because he wants to talk to me, not because he needs something from me. When I offer advice, it's welcomed rather than dismissed. When we spend time together, we're both choosing to be there rather than fulfilling some obligation. I often think about what would have happened if I'd found that $1,500 somehow and attended Marcus's grand opening. I would have been sitting in that overpriced event watching my son perform for people who didn't really care about him, pretending that everything was fine between us. The underlying problems in our relationship would have continued to fester, and Marcus would have continued down a path that was ultimately making both of us unhappy. Instead, saying no to that ticket demand saved both of our futures. It forced both of us to grow in ways that were long overdue. The scholarship I established has now helped 12 young nurses complete their education. I get letters from them occasionally telling me about their work in hospitals and clinics, about the patients they're helping. That money is creating ripples of good in the world that will continue long after I'm gone. And I've taken 4 more trips since Italy, each one teaching me something new about myself and the world. I've hiked in Ireland, toured museums in Paris, and learned to tango in Argentina. At 63, I'm more adventurous and confident than I was at 30. To any parents watching this, I want you to understand that love doesn't mean giving your children everything they want. Love means helping them become people who can appreciate what they have, work for what they want, and treat others with kindness and respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, even when it breaks your heart to do it. And to anyone who has lost themselves in trying to make someone else happy, I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your own life. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. You matter not just for what you can give to others, but for who you are as an individual person. The ticket to Marcus's grand opening cost $1,500, but the price of saying yes would have been my self-respect and my son's character. That was a price neither of us could afford to pay. I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? How did you find the courage to put your own needs first? Please share your stories. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family love and finding the strength to choose what's right over what's easy. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to value yourself as much as you value the people you love.